Well, welcome everyone. Those of you present here and all of you present through the live stream from around the country. My name is Father Charles Trujols. I'm the director of the Catholic Information Center, and I've been here for almost 9 or 10 years. And it's been such a wonderful pleasure to be able to provide to all of you for all these years the possibility of the sacraments here at the Catholic Information Center. We have daily Mass. I'm here available always to hear your confessions, and we have tons of speakers and programs. And today we have the honor to host Matthew Bunson. Matthew Bunson, who is going to share with us the book that he just wrote on Pope Leo XIV. This is the book, the first American Pope, Leo XIV, and he had the first presentation. The premiere of the book was in Rome. That's my recollection, understanding, and it was a huge success, and we are very excited to have you here with us. Matthew Bunson is the Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News, and for the past 20 years, Dr. Bunson, because he's a doctor, has been active in the area of Catholic social communications and education, including writing, editing, and teaching on a variety of topics related with the Catholic history or church history and the papacy and the saints and Catholic culture. And he has written like so many books. Momentarily, he will come up to the podium and he will start with some excerpts of his book. We have also with us Catherine Hedro, who is going to have a conversation with Matthew on the topic. Catherine is the host of EWTN News in Depth, which is a weekly 1-hour discussion of current events in the church, in politics, in culture, all from a Catholic perspective. And she has been covering and covers underreported stories and clarifying also the church position in many, difficult, issues. And then she also anchored previously she anchored this also famous program, EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, for 5 years, I think it was. And then she has also covered so many events in Rome and around the world. And she has also written so many articles and stories and books. And she is great, because I have to say that the first time that I was interviewed on TV, I was so nervous, was by Catherine Hedro. And she taught me, how to smile. And anyway, so with that, I want to please help me to welcome Matthew Bunson and Catherine Hedro.
Well, good evening. It's a joy to be here tonight, if for no other reason that I owe a very large debt to the Catholic Information Center, because as some of you who went to the gala last year probably saw a video of various people who had been impacted by the Catholic Information Center, and one of them happened to be my wife, who is a convert to Catholicism. So when I was asked if I would be willing to appear and talk about my book on Pope Leo XIV, I immediately said yes, first in gratitude for everything that the CIC does here in Washington, D.C. and around the country, but also because it is part of the enormous, almost insurmountably large debt that I owe to the CIC, because had it not been for that influence and my wife's conversion to the church, we might not now be married. So my thanks again to the CIC and to Father Charles, and also to Angelica for arranging all of this with her customary patience, skill, and finesse. Well, I was asked to do a little bit of a reading from the book tonight, and I wanted to read a passage from it that I think in some ways embodies some of the key thoughts in the book itself. It's perhaps the one and only interesting part of the book. But what we're really looking at is that Pope Leo XIV is someone who is unique, unprecedented in the history of the Church. It isn't every day that we can say that in the 2,000-year history of the Church that something unprecedented happened. And that really did happen on May 8th, just a few weeks ago with his election. He is the first member of the Order of St. Augustine to be elected Pope. He is also obviously the first US-born person, the first American in that sense to be elected Pope. And yet, as I write, the pontificate of Pope Leo XIV is still only days old. And yet, there is a sense of clarity and mission about it that began from his walk onto the world stage on May 8th. Among the reasons for the sense of certainty and immediate stability is a deliberate decision he made to dress in the traditional vesture of the popes, adding to the papal white soutane and pellegrina the red mozzetta and stole. This is not a rejection of the deliberate simplicity of Pope Francis, but a conscious effort to connect himself, and with it his pontificate, to his predecessors and the long customs and symbols of the papacy and the Church. This drawing of a line of continuity and integration goes far beyond the merely symbolic or the sartorial. There is a manifest desire to achieve the integration of recent pontificates, the Second Vatican Council, and the Fathers of the Church. This is not some effort to placate perceived factions or camps in some ecclesiastical power struggle. Rather, it is mining the rich treasures of teaching that characterize the great fathers, the council, and the modern popes to build unity in the Church in a fractured era. Pope Leo XIV believes that these teachings can impel the Church toward unity, rooted in Christ, and prepare all of us for the immense task of evangelization to which all of us are called. This integration has been on display since the first Urbi et Orbi blessing on May 8th and has continued virtually every day since. It is obvious in the use of references in his public speaking and preaching to the Second Vatican Council, especially the seminal documents Lumen Gentium and Gaudium et Spes. To Church Fathers, including Augustine, Pope St. Gregory I the Great, obscure doctors of the Church like Ephraim the Syrian, and Ignatius of Antioch, as well as to all of his recent predecessors. Like these and many other predecessors in their times, Pope Leo XIV faces a host of challenges at the start of his pontificate. Today, they include the war in Ukraine and Gaza and elsewhere, the technological revolutions and the threat to the human person, growing secularism and atheism and the hatred of religious belief, mass migration and the quest for work and dignity, social and cultural fragmentation, threats to the family and human life from gender ideology, abortion, euthanasia, and surrogacy, and divisions within the Church, most conspicuously the German synodal way and its heterodox enterprise for the Church in Germany. Our new Holy Father seems convinced that the road ahead for the Church and the world is by hearing and applying the timeless teachings of the Church in new situations and new circumstances. This is why he is so consciously integrating Augustinian and Leonine thought in a deeply Christocentric way. Chicago, Peru, Rome. Pastor, teacher, missionary, prior general, bishop, cardinal. Pope Leo XIV has seen and experienced the Church in more contexts than perhaps any other person currently living. He understands that the needs of the people of God are, in many respects, quite different in each of those contexts. He knows that the Church must be responsive to those needs in a nimble and humble way. But most of all, to repeat some of Leo's most important words, the underlying challenge, he says, that Christ left us to preach the gospel, and this is the same everywhere. What Pope Leo XIV, following the great St. Augustine himself, will bring to the papacy is an uncompromising emphasis on the divine person of Jesus Christ. This is the same everywhere because he is the same everywhere. He is the one whom everybody needs, whether they are materially poor or spiritually parched. He is the only principle of unity that can unite Chicago and Peru and Rome and every place and every person in between. In illo uno unum, in the one we are one. That, more than anything else, is what Pope Leo XIV believes the world needs now to know. Thank you.
Matthew, I think that passage that you read from set up the framing for this conversation perfectly. And personally, I've been so excited to have this conversation with you because between the funeral for Pope Francis and the inaugural Mass for Pope Leo, you were in Rome for about a month.
5 weeks.
5 weeks. I have not had the chance.
Who's counting? But it's Rome, so we'll take it.
I have not had the privilege of catching up with you. And I've had the pleasure of working alongside you for over a decade.
Yep.
So let's just set the scene. Take us back to 1 month ago, May 8th. Mm-hmm. You're on the EWTN set in Rome, right at the entrance of St. Peter's Square. Cardinal Prevost walks out on the loggia. Right. What's your reaction?
Well, the reaction in some ways began a few minutes before that, when Cardinal Dominique Mamberti, who's the proto-deacon, or the senior cardinal deacon, walked out and did that very famous phrase, Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum. We have a pope, habemus papam. And then went through that magnificent Latin phrase of eminentissimum, reverendissimum dominum, and said his first name. We were all studying first names of all the cardinals. It's in the accusative case, because that's what you have to do if you're waiting for the Latin. And it was Robertum, and then Franciscum. And it was at that point that I realized it was Robert Francis. And then he finished it by saying, Prevost. Mm-hmm. And I think there was a combination of reactions, I think, for myself. The first was an understanding almost immediately of the unprecedented quality. I used that word a little while ago, that this was something truly unprecedented. But it was also something that we were told repeatedly simply couldn't happen, that an American could never be elected pope. And I know we'll talk a little bit more probably about some of his qualities. For me, it was a sense of first excitement at having an announcement that we have a new pope, because we had been now weeks without a Holy Father. And for us, this is like a family that had lost our father. Mm-hmm. But then this sudden recognition, all right, this is the man that the cardinals have chosen. And then his name, Leo XIV. And it became very clear right from the minute he came out on the loggia that this was somebody, and I'll use the phrase, who knows what he's about.
And I want to dig more into that and the significance of his name, definitely. But again, you were studying these cardinals. Truthfully, was Cardinal Prevost on anyone's short list?
Yes. I will say truthfully that for about 3 days before the conclave actually started, so that would be on May 7th when they did their procession into the Sistine Chapel. I think it was the 7th. We've all lost track of time. It was the 7th, yes. 4 ballots. I actually had his bio on my phone and was starting to get a sense of him. And the reason I say that is that from almost the moment I landed in Rome, so that was on April 22nd, so the day after Pope Francis died, I would be talking with friends and Vaticanisti and journalists and others, and they were quietly mentioning his name. But then when I was talking with Vaticanisti, they would also say, so these Vatican experts, they would say, yes, but he's an American. So the likelihood of him being elected is almost non-existent. So I kept coming across that name. And Cardinal Timothy Dolan, the Archbishop of New York, had a very similar experience. His was a little more august than mine because he was being asked that by fellow cardinals who would ask him, what do you know about this Cardinal Prevost? Because he has a very good reputation. We've heard things about him. And Cardinal Dolan, in his usual great sense of humor, said, well, I don't really know him myself, but I'm going to find out. So he did. He said he relaxed a little bit when he found out that he's a White Sox fan and not a Cubs fan, because I guess there's this Cardinal Dolan coming from St. Louis and all of that. But this is a name that kept coming up. Now, there were other names, obviously, that were circulating. The heavy favorite going in, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State. So it didn't come as a huge shock that he was elected, but it still came as a surprise.
Your book that you released through EWTN, I think came out about 2 weeks after he was elected Pope. So I'm going to ask a question I think a lot of us are wondering. How? How did you write this
Right.
book? How did you learn about Leo so quickly?
Well, for the record, AI was not involved. Happily. If we could find a program that would do a complete book, might be interested. But as my wife can attest, because she was able to come over for the last few weeks of the interregnum, she said that she fell asleep at night with me typing and woke up in the morning with me typing. Part of it is I had the great blessing in 2005 and 2013 to do bios similar to this on Pope Benedict XVI and, of course, Pope Francis. So I had a sense of some of the requirements and what's really needed for a book like this. Part of it is also understanding what your goal is, and it's why we chose the name in here for the title, A Portrait. Because what we want to accomplish with this book is there will be plenty of time for exhaustive biographies of him. 500-page books. What we wanted to do with A Portrait is to offer an understanding of his life, his biography, but then also the influences on him, what shaped him, what were the roles of the Augustinian order, what were the roles of Peru, what led him to be a bishop in Peru, to have this great missionary zeal, what led Pope Francis to pluck him out of seeming obscurity in 2023 as this bishop in Chiclayo, Peru, to take over one of the biggest offices in the Vatican. And then what were some of the things that the cardinals themselves saw in him? Just really trying to pull all of those different threads together in a portrait. And I think with those reasonable expectations for what we needed and wanted to do, I think a book like that is possible.
And it's a service to
It
the
is, yeah.
faithful, absolutely. So let's get a portrait of our new
Okay.
Pope. You already mentioned his name, Leo. Tell us more about the significance of that name and your reaction. We are at the CIC, which has a special love for the Leonine legacy,
Exactly.
after all.
And then I think you're an
Yes.
alum, right?
Yes.
So out he comes on the loggia, Leo XIV, and it was very clear why he picked Leo XIV, and he himself confirmed why he picked Leo. As an interesting sidebar, when he was elected, so in the Sistine Chapel, he received, we know, well more than 100 votes from the 133 cardinal electors. And the senior cardinal, in this case Cardinal Parolin, came up to him and asked him in Latin, "Do you accept canonical election as a supreme pontiff?" And he said, "Accetto, I accept." And then they always ask, "By what name will you be called?" He said to several cardinals who were in the conclave, "We're not betraying secrets, I promise. No one will be excommunicated because of this conversation." He said he thought for a time about taking the name Augustine, because as he said on the loggia of St. Peter's, "I am a son of Augustine," as a faithful Augustinian of 55 years of experience. But then he thought, no, I'm going to take a different name. And he said the name Leo XIV. And there was apparently a gasp and then spontaneous applause in the Sistine Chapel, because the cardinals themselves, who understand the church, grasped what exactly he was doing with this choice. He took the name Leo XIV in honor of two great popes. The first, we go back to Leo I, the Great, who in his time, in 452, stopped Attila the Hun and a horde of barbarians from destroying Rome, and at the same time also defended with great heroism the church's faithful understanding of who Jesus Christ is in the middle of these great Christological controversies and the heresies. Then the other Leo that he picked, and really this is the one I think that's more important even than Leo the Great, is Leo XIII. Leo XIII, 1878 to 1903, Pope for 25 years, realized in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, this massive series of changes in technology because of the industrial world, because of the impact it was having on families, on culture, on economics, and everything else, wanted to find a way for the church to be heard and to have a role and say in that industrial revolution and the impact it was having. So he issued in 1891 an encyclical, Rerum Novarum, which became, of course, the blueprint for Catholic social teaching, how the church responds to the great changes in society. Leo took his name Leo XIV, in honor of Leo XIII, with that very thing in mind, that he recognizes the immense revolutions that are taking place in the 21st century in technology, but in particular, he has mentioned AI. So he doesn't know, he still, again, didn't help my book. But those revolutions he sees impacting everything that we touch, everything that touches us. But he's also very focused, as Leo XIII was, on what is the heart of Catholic social teaching. It is the dignity of the human person made in the image and likeness of God. So he is distilling, just in his very choice of name, the heart, the essence of Catholic social thought, and wants in this new environment to defend the human person in the face of these new threats, but also these new opportunities. He's not afraid of technology. That's very clear with his great focus over these years on social media, on the need for formation for people to be able to use social media. He wants us to see these as opportunities, but also to be very much aware of the threats and the challenges.
In those 5 weeks you were in Rome, you were doing daily live coverage from the Vatican on all that was taking place. What a privilege to be there,
it really was.
And it was a privilege to watch. And I was tuning in, and one of my favorite lines that you said, and within the first week of Pope Leo's pontificate, was, "He's a pope who knows how to pope." What did you mean by that?
Well, I have to, in full credit, we have to go all the way back to John Paul II. I think it was in his visit to the United States, I think it was in 1979, where a rabbi back then, he was being interviewed, and he said, I have to say, as far as you Catholics are concerned, you have a pope who knows how to pope. And what I meant by that, in hearkening to that great phrase, was he is somebody who very clearly, from the minute he walked out on the loggia, all of us can picture in our minds him on the loggia that day, where he was completely calm, he was at peace. He was a little emotional about his election when he stood there in silence for a while. But his choice of vesture, again, of the mozzetta, of the different symbols of the papacy, but he is also, from the day that he was on that loggia to the next day when he's celebrated Mass with the members of the College of Cardinals, we just elected him Pope, to every day since, there is an ease about him. He has just moved right into the role of Supreme Pontiff that I think has taken a lot of people by surprise. But there is, as I think it was Corriere della Sera, one of the Italian newspapers, put it, un papa calma. There's a calmness about him. I've used the phrase as some of my Italian friends have, sereno. He is serene in how he goes about his business. And there's also humor in him. He's made jokes in several languages, which for anyone who's tried to learn languages, it's harder than it sounds. He even, just a couple of days ago, at a gathering of a meeting in the Vatican, apologized to everyone because he was a few minutes late. I think it was a gathering at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, the Angelicum. He said, "I apologize for being late. I hope you'll forgive me. You have to understand, I've only been on the job for a month." So there is that ease about him, and I think he knows how to pope, and we're starting to see that also in the decisions that he's making and some of the approaches I think we can anticipate he'll be making in the future.
Yeah, there is this levity about him, and he seems like he's having fun.
Yes.
Even you mentioned
there's also a certain formality to him as well. He seems not to eschew, and this is again no criticism of Pope Francis, who had his own style of governance. But he does not sort of wave off what's called the baciamano, where people are there to show signs of respect. It's a restoration in some ways, as I was saying earlier, of continuity, of certain traditions that exist. And I think that's a very good thing. It's a formality that in so many areas of culture today we have lost. An ability to understand when a situation is actually serious, that it requires a certain formality. And he's done that. And you can see how the cardinals themselves are responding to that. They are going back to some of their traditions. For example, when they initially come into his presence, they removed their zucchetto, their scarlet zucchettos, as a sign of respect to him, and then put it back on. Little things like that are visual cues to people of the ease of governance, but also how he sees himself as successor to St. Peter.
You mentioned he almost took the name Pope Augustine.
Yes.
He's of the Augustinian order. How is that going to shape the way that he leads?
Yeah, I think the way to look at that is in a couple of different ways. The first is theologically. He said that I am a son of Augustine. And when we look at every homily, every speech he's given, there are these beautiful threads of Augustinian thought. So, for example, he has had recourse to Augustine's very famous phrase, donec requiescat in te. Our hearts are restless until they rest in you. And part of that is from the Confessions. So he understands the need for personal conversion. As an Augustinian, as I was saying, at 55 years, he went into high school junior seminary at the age of 14 under the Augustinians, studied at Villanova, an Augustinian institution, served as an Augustinian missionary in Peru, came back, headed the Augustinian order itself for 2 terms, 12 years of traveling the globe. 2 of the tenets, I think, of the Augustinians that we're already seeing in him is this idea of hospitality, of friendships, of community. It's emblematic, I think, in these early days. It's a perfect snapshot of how that works for him, how important community and friendship is, that he took a very short ride, he has to now because of security, from where he is currently in the Vatican. He's obviously planning to move back to the Apostolic Palace at some point. It's like a 3-minute drive across the street to the headquarters of the Augustinians, so the Augustinianum, and he had lunch with all of the Augustinians there. He celebrated the 70th birthday of one of the heads of the Augustinian order. And you could see in the pictures how much he treasures those friendships and how it's very clear those friendships are going to continue on with him throughout his pontificate as he builds this little inner circle that will be around him for the duration of his time as Pope. But then there's also the theological aspect and the spiritual aspect, that in the Augustinian tradition, there is, as Augustine himself did, this relentless search for the truth. It is a search for the truth that Augustine found, but he found it again in Christ, that Christ was the truth for Augustine. And he said, as Cardinal Prevost, and he said this repeatedly also as head of the Augustinians, that when you find that truth, when you have that encounter with the truth, which is Christ, that love of God impels you toward love of neighbor. It rests at the heart, I think, of why he wanted to become a missionary and why he proved to be such a capable one, precisely because he has that comfort, that faith in the love of God that also impels him then to be somebody who loves neighbor.
Yeah, those friendships, I think there have been reports his old friends have been texting him still, and he's still texting them right back.
Yes,
so
exactly.
It's obvious he cherishes
Right.
these friendships.
What I want to know is he texts back as Bob?
Right, I know. We'll report back on that. Yesterday officially marked 1 month since his election as Pope, and so within this month we've heard even more of his speeches, homilies, general audiences. Have there been certain themes that have stood out to you, and is there more you want to say about his style and approach so far?
Yeah, I think the first in terms of style is what I was saying earlier, that
Right.
there is a sense of ease about him. He's just slid right into the role of Pope. In terms of themes, though, I think we were given a very keen insight into one of the pillars, the heart of his pontificate. I was saying that this is going to be pulling together 2 traditions. We've touched briefly on both of them already, the Leonine tradition and the Augustinian tradition, but they're anchored in something. For him, it is anchored in the divine person of Jesus Christ. It is intensely Christocentric. And in that is the peace to be found only in the risen Christ. What were his very first words as Pope? Peace be with you. He proclaims the words of Jesus Christ, the very first words out of his mouth as Pope. But he added an important qualifier, that it is the peace of the risen Christ. It is a peace that you can only find in the risen Christ. He made the point, and I think Cardinal Fernando Filoni is the Grand Master of the Order of the Holy Sepulchre, when I talked with them, he said, peace treaties can be broken, ceasefires can be broken. He said, but what Pope Leo is trying to get at is that there is only a true and lasting peace if you have, in fact, the peace that is rooted in Jesus Christ. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing. You can see how his approach to the situation in Ukraine, his approach to settling some of the difficulties and challenges that we have in the church. One area, of course, is unity. He has stressed again and again in his homilies, in his presentations, the idea of communion, of unity, but it's a unity that has to be built on Christ, which means it has to be an authentic one.
And that will be a long-lasting one.
Yes.
Too. You mentioned this in the passage that you read from your book, but he has this really unique background: mathematician,
Right.
canon lawyer, a missionary. Speak more about that unique combination and what we might expect from his papacy because of that.
Yeah, one of the things that we know from the general congregations of the cardinals as they were preparing to go into the conclave was they had a list of things that there were big concerns for them. One of them was law, and the other was finances. Obviously, having a mathematician as pope is probably a good thing. I think he knows how to add. But then also having somebody who is an expert in canon law. So he has a doctorate in canon law from the Angelicum. So that's his alma mater. He was just there a couple of days ago, as I was saying. So he will be able to approach many of the canonical, sort of the legal challenges that the church has internally in a way that we have not seen for many years from a pope. He is also somebody, I think, who understands one of those other categories that the cardinals listed. They needed and wanted to find somebody with an intense missionary zeal, who truly loved the missions, who wanted to be out proclaiming the gospel. They clearly found it. They found in him somebody who, he was ordained in 1982, and only 3 years later was sent into the mission fields of Peru, in one of the most dangerous and demanding missionary areas anywhere in the whole of Latin America. He flourished, partly because he has in his temperament, obviously, as the way he's eased into being pope, a remarkable adaptability that we find in classic missionaries. I think, for example, of Francis Xavier, who could land in a country like China or Japan or elsewhere across Asia and India, and within a very short amount of time, grasp the language, the culture, the nuance of the people he was talking to, the people he was proclaiming Christ Jesus to. And I think that missionary zeal is something that was also very clear to them. The other thing that I think he's learned from the Augustinian tradition, and it goes back to that sense of community and friendship, is that when people who were at the table with him, he was at both synods in 23 and 24, and I know you were there part of our coverage. We had the chance to be on air quite a bit for that at his table, there were people who participated in all of these roundtable discussions of the synod twice. The funny thing was that when you'd interview them about him, they would say that there wasn't anything that was absolutely mind-blowing that he would say to them. They couldn't remember specific things that he said, but there was something about him that he listened, that he had an ability to absorb what people were saying, their perspective. As one Cardinal Chomoli of Latin America said, that he has one mouth but two ears, and he knows how to use both of them. And so that ability to listen, I think, is one of the hallmarks, and I think it was one of the reasons why, and we heard similar comments from some of the cardinal electors, that he listened. And he was there every day at these general congregations, the whole time, taking notes on everything that was said. And they know he was because the days after, when he met with the whole College of Cardinals in a 3-hour closed-door session, he was repeating back the notes of specific cardinals and what they said and what their concerns were for the church. So he listens, he assimilates, he integrates, and pulls all of those threads together. And it means that he is, I think, as far as the College of Cardinals is concerned, exactly the person that they needed in this moment in church history.
I'm going to ask you another question, and then I think at that point we can open it up to the audience as well, because there's so much to discuss here already. The first American Pope?
Yes.
There's a lot more we can say on that, but Matthew, having an American as Pope, how do you think, and this is a big question, that might impact US Vatican relations right now?
Well, I think first we can say that the first American Pope, the day that he announces that he's coming to the United States, will be intense. We don't know when that will be. He's made a few small suggestions that it may not be soon because I think he has a lot of priorities. I would be personally surprised if he doesn't go to Peru first, because it is a place that is now so deep in his heart. I think for the U.S., this is an opportunity for a profound spiritual renewal. I think he's going to spark that. I think he's somebody who can speak directly to the United States. He's from Chicago, of course. He's a White Sox fan, has been back here many times, so he has not lost touch with the U.S., even though he's been gone for many decades as a missionary. In terms of Vatican and US relations, I think we're already seeing in some ways an openness to dialogue, not that there wasn't with Pope Francis, but I think it's a different approach in the sense that he is, as an American, somebody who can use that language, who understands the US position in a way that no pope ever has. As somebody said, it's fascinating to listen to a pope speak English without an accent. Now, in some ways, for all the Italians, he's the one with the accent. But his Italian, of course, is perfect, it's fluent. His Spanish is beyond fluent. But to understand the American mind is going to be crucial, I think. And as we see him also make appointments to the episcopacy here in the US, we have a number of major sees that are either vacant or soon will be, or what they call superannuated. In other words, the archbishops there are over the age of 75, which is usually the customary retirement time. Mm-hmm. As he begins making those decisions, who's going to be shaping the US bishops and the US church for decades to come? That'll be something that becomes increasingly obvious. And then when he meets, because I suspect he will, President Donald Trump, that will be a very interesting moment in exactly the same way that it was an intriguing moment when he met twice with J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
No, he definitely keeps his pulse on what's happening in the U.S. It seems he speaks with his American brothers quite frequently.
He does, yes, both of them.
Yes, exactly. Well, I think at this point, I know I still have a lot of questions, but I'm sure our audience does as well. So we have a microphone back here. If you have a question for Matthew, please raise your hand and we can keep this conversation going. Or I can keep thinking, percolating on it, and I'll just move on with we have a few right here.
Speaking about tradition and unity, I've been going to the Tridentine Mass for 3 years. And I've gotten to know the folks as other people have gone for 30 years. I know like the Diocese of Arlington was 18 parishes reduced to 3, and then 5 other remote locations. What do you think how maybe the Pope will react to have tradition and unity?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things on his plate, and one of them obviously is the traditional Latin Mass. I'm sure all of you, being a very informed audience, you've probably been following what's been happening in Charlotte, for example, with the traditional Latin Mass there. So I think this is, as he begins this process of promoting unity in the life of the church, I think clearly the TLM, the traditional Latin Mass, is going to be an element of that. Now, in fairness, it is a significant issue in the United States, in France, and in Italy. Less so in other parts of the world, just by nature of the cultures there and everything else. But that's a huge swath of Catholicism, and how it has played out in social media is something I know he's very aware of because he is somebody who is attuned to social media. I think we can anticipate a couple of things. The first is, let's take a look at his liturgical precision. I say this because he was very famous in the Augustinians as demanding and wanting and expecting real liturgical precision in how they celebrated Mass, the vestments that they were wearing. So that usually indicates a certain desire that liturgy be done properly. He talks about the need for liturgy to be done right because it is in the liturgy that we have the sacraments, in particular, of course, the Eucharist. So I think that may factor into as he begins to build an answer to what the long term is for the traditional Latin Mass. I think there are several options. In fact, I would encourage everyone to take a look at the National Catholic Register. Go to ncregister.com. You can see various pieces that we have on the options that are in front of him, canonically, liturgically. Among them is pushing ahead with what has been termed a sort of crackdown, however one wants to describe it, or limitations on the Latin Mass. But the other ones are a little more interesting to my mind. One is to sort of revert back to the terms of Summorum Pontificum, which expanded the use of the traditional Latin Mass. I think he's probably going to find a middle ground, and feel free to quote me on it when it happens, if I'm right or wrong. But I think he'll try to find a middle ground of finding why, because he wants to find peace. He wants to find unity. And the way he can do that is by leaving this in the hands of the bishops around the world, but at the same time making it clear that those who go to the traditional Latin Mass have a place in the life of the church. I think as he builds unity and continues down that road, I'd be very surprised if that's not the path that he takes, but again, I could be completely wrong.
think I saw, did you have a question, sir?
Yeah, thank you very much. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Eugene McCarthy. I'm with the small mission of the Holy See to the OAS. A couple of things that struck me very much. I was in my country of origin, the United Kingdom, when the conclave took place, and the coverage was surprisingly good for an increasingly secular state.
Right.
Very, very good indeed. One of the things that I think everybody was surprised, of course, I don't expect the bookmakers to have much of an inner knowledge, certainly, of what's really going on in the Vatican. But what surprised me, perhaps most of all, was you had, correct me if the figure's wrong, 119 to 120 cardinals who were electing him from very different parts of the world. Most of them, many of them were getting to know each other, perhaps even for the first time, and at best the second time. He'd had a key position for 3 years, a very important position, but even with that, I'm still surprised that the qualities he possessed, which you've articulated so well, and in the aftermath of his election have come, were well known at the time. So I had predicted that he would be elected on the weekend, and I was dead wrong. He came in on Thursday afternoon.
But you still predicted it.
But I think everybody else was wrong, so I was in good company. But I think the question I would ask you is what you think the factors were that within barely 24 to 48 hours,
Right.
you had a group of cardinals, of course they were not meeting in secret the whole period of time, had come to know him so well, other than the intervention of the Holy Spirit. What were the main reasons you think that resulted in what I consider a gift of the Holy Spirit?
Well, you're right. When you say that the cardinals didn't really know each other very well, Pope Francis brought all of the members of the college in 2014 together as part of his examination of the life of the family in the world. And he did not bring them all together again until 2022, so essentially 8 years. And it was in 2022 that they were really brought to Rome as for a discussion on the reform of the Roman Curia and synodality. So it was basically 3 days of lectures. So it's absolutely true that when they arrived in Rome for the conclave, they did not know each other at all. Imagine the number of cardinals who had been appointed in those intervening years who knew even less about each other. And we're talking about very far-flung corners of the world, Mongolia and Tonga. And so one of the tasks that they recognized they had set before them is getting to know each other and then assessing based on reputation, but then not just on reputation. That's not enough for them. You can't trust simply that somebody's, well, he's a very competent administrator. How do we know this? And so they had a couple of options as to when they would set the start date for the conclave. It could have been at the very earliest day, but even Pope Benedict XVI, when he sort of tweaked the rules a little bit, allowed for the fact that they could start a few days early. They immediately dismissed that. Instead, some cardinals wanted a much longer conversation time. They settled on a sort of a compromise. That afforded them 2 extra days of meetings amongst themselves. So I think they were beginning in those general congregations to do 2 things. The first was to lay out in very stark terms, what are the great challenges of the church that the church is facing today? I've listed a few of them. But then, what are some of the attributes of the Pope that we might be looking for? And then those 2 lists in some ways coalesced. And that, I think, is where they began hearing more frequently the name of Cardinal Prevost. Yes, he had this reputation as a great missionary. He was known to many, if not most or all, of the Latin American cardinals because they had interacted with him in some fashion in his time in Peru, especially as a bishop in Chiclayo for, almost a decade. But then some of them knew him also as head of the Augustinians. In his 2 terms there, he was traveling all over the world. So he met with many of the bishops who then themselves became cardinals, so they knew him from that. And then there were those who had dealt with him in his term, as brief term as it was, from 2023 to the time of his election, as prefect of the dicastery for bishops, which is the office that helps the Pope to select. So each of them probably had snippets of encounters with him. All of them understood him to be a listener, somebody who builds consensus, but beyond consensus, it's somebody who had a reputation for listening, going to experts, not simply making decisions by himself, and then at the end of it, making sure that the decision you've made is deemed a just one. One little insight that we've heard from members of the Augustinians and even members of his own staff in the dicastery for bishops is that in the time that he served, especially as head of the Augustinians, so that's 12 years essentially as head of an entire order of 3,000 men traveling the world, no one at the end of his terms had felt that he had treated them unjustly. That when he had made decisions, he would communicate it. He would tell them why he had made that decision. So he was somebody who communicates with justice, but is also very, very famous for explaining himself, the importance of having a good communicator as a manager. So I think all of those different aspects coalesced, which is why I think it took them 4 ballots to choose him. I'm guessing that by the 3rd ballot, he was almost there. I look forward to finding out. I don't know how, but hopefully we'll find out. Then they went to lunch. So they went to pranzo, and then they came back in the afternoon, and he was elected Pope on that 4th ballot, which, as a historical sidebar, was the 4th ballot that also elected Pope Benedict XVI. So the speed with which he was chosen is pretty astonishing.
If you have a question for Matthew, please do raise your hand up. Our own Father John Paul Mary. Go easy on him, Father.
Thank you, Matthew. Since his election, there have been many endearing stories that have come out about him. Can you share with us maybe a few stories that we've heard in the last couple of weeks that have come out that I think everybody has been really incredibly interested in him, and just all these stories. Maybe you can tell the one about his personal trainer, which is the best one.
Well, that's right. So apparently, this speaks well of somebody who both, in terms of spiritual direction, as we all know, you need to stay healthy. That physical activity, staying healthy in that sense is important. So yes, he apparently went to a gym right near the Vatican in an area called the Prati. And apparently his trainer looked up and saw Pope Leo XIV on the balcony and realized, holy smokes, that's the guy I train here in the gym, because he simply knew him as Padre Roberto.
That's Robert.
Robert, exactly. That's right. So he also plays tennis. Apparently has a very good backhand. And in fact, I think it's the Sinner,
Yes.
the tennis pro.
Sad day for him yesterday, but
Oh, yeah. Thank you. You're more up to speed on that than I am. At the French Open, I
Yes,
guess, right? Yeah. So he met with him, and they were joking about playing tennis in one of the beautiful chapels. He said, no, he said, we can't because we'll end up breaking something. Classic, as we're discovering, classic Leo. 2 small stories. The first, it's not necessarily endearing, but I think it tells us something, that when he was in Peru, he was there at a time of great political upheaval. You had the Shining Path, which was a Maoist Marxist terror organization that was slaughtering people all over the country in the hopes of instituting a Marxist revolution, not just in Peru, but across the whole of Latin America. He opposed them, but then he also vigorously opposed what were seen by so many as the excessive efforts on the part of the Fujimori government to expunge the Shining Path. At one point, he stood down armed gunmen of the Shining Path who were trying to kidnap some of his seminarians and conscript them into service with the Shining Path, or to hold them for ransom. He talked them out of it. It tells you, as we have seen these photos of him in boots during floods, on donkeys as he made his way across this rugged terrain, that he was somebody who was fearless in dealing with what he saw as a grave injustice or a great threat to those who are in harm's way. The other moment, though, that I think is very much seared in my mind is the day of his installation Mass. So that's May 18th, when he had a receiving line after the Mass in St. Peter's Basilica. And you had crowned heads of Europe, you had presidents, you had prime ministers, and then his brother. And his brother came up, Brother Louis, and they looked at each other for a second, and to I'm sure the horror of Vatican protocol experts, they gave each other this immense and deep hug. And it was the love that you could see of two brothers. And what struck me most about it was the authenticity of that moment, but also how it was such a testament. And we haven't really had a chance much to talk about that tonight. The intensity that still exists, the relationship between the brothers. And it's a relationship that goes all the way back to their earliest days in the Chicago area, where he would play at saying Mass on an ironing board with Necco wafers.
Wow.
And his brothers were the congregation, an unruly congregation, I'm sure. But that family life, the intensity of that Catholic family life, seemingly so ordinary, people wouldn't have looked in any other way. Like, they would look at this family that would go to Mass every week, Altar and Rosary Society, his mom, his dad. It seemed so ordinary. And yet, this was the environment that fostered his vocation. His parents encouraged him in his call, not just to the priesthood, but to the religious life. What that says about that family life, that it produced not just a priest, not just a cardinal, but Pope Leo XIV, is a testament to two things: the significance of family life in the cultivation and handing on of the faith, but also in fostering and nurturing vocations of all types.
And you're right. I think as American Catholics, to be able to relate to him in so many different ways, I think that might stir up that renewal for us here in the U.S.
I think so,
particular.
yeah.
We have time for one more question. So, there we go.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Actually, my question was a follow-up to what you were just saying. When I saw him, I'm a convert in my 8th year. When I saw him, I'm like, man, if this guy can be Pope, maybe I can be a saint. You know, like just like thinking it through. Like it in some ways like demystifies or de-foreignifies Catholicism for me just a little bit more. Can you speak at all more to how you just conjecture like how you think this impacts American Catholicism moving forward? And then as a scholar, I'm interested, like how did you do this research so quickly? Was it open source stuff? Did you have connections? Like, are you able to illuminate that at all?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll answer the second question first. So with this book, I'm very grateful to EWTN Books Publishing, EWTN, and Sophia, the Institute Press, because obviously this is in collaboration with them. They helped me a lot with the research, in part because it's obviously so time compressed, and so invaluable time in helping me assemble all of the things that we needed. I have to give a shout out also to all of my colleagues at EWTN News for the incredible reporting across the board at places like the Catholic News Agency, at the National Catholic Register, Aci Stampa, which is our Italian agency, as well as Aci Digital, which is in Brazil, and Aci Prensa, which is the largest of the Spanish language agencies that we have. All of them, in doing this research, provided rich detail into his life very quickly. It helped that I had a pretty good sense of him. Now, had it been someone wildly that we didn't know, it would have been an interesting challenge, but that's part of the fun of doing a book like this. But it turns out that the cardinals saw in him the man that they wanted, and I think we were able then to move very quickly. I think being an American also helped, which brings me to the first part of your question, which is, as we were saying earlier, I think Pope Leo grew up in the United States. He understands, I think, two things that are really interesting. The first is the life of faith that he grew up with, that period of the 1950s into the 60s. But then he also saw that the upheaval in the 1970s and into the 80s. Now, we don't in any way ever blame the Second Vatican Council for that. This is a time of the great revolutions that we're hitting across the world, the sexual, political, economic, technological revolutions. So he has lived through a series of like a golden age of American Catholicism, what some call, but then also the era, especially the time of John Paul II, when he was ordained a priest in 1982, as I was saying. He has seen all of that. But he's also, as he has really talked about since the day of his election, he leans into and truly believes in that other, one of those titles of the popes, which is Pontifex, which is the builder of bridges. He is, I think, somebody, and one of the reasons why we use the name American Pope is that he is a bridge builder. He is somebody who's going to be able to connect North America and South America. The Americas, he's been called the first Pan-American Pope, but he is American in the sense that he truly is, he embodies both Latin America and South America and North America. And I think that also gives him an important voice in American Catholicism as we see before our eyes the demographic changes that are taking place, the economic changes in the country. So he's going to be able to speak from an international standpoint, from the lived experience of Latin America, the lived experience of somebody who's been around the world, but then also somebody who understands what it is to go on July 4th and have a hot dog and a beer, who has been to White Sox games, who knows what it is to live in that environment and the challenges that the average American Catholic has today. And I'm personally looking forward to how he speaks to American Catholicism and the whole of America as a conscience, as we ourselves grapple with the great challenges and fragmentation that we're seeing politically, economically, and technologically.
Well said.
Matthew Bunson.
Thank you. That was really illuminating. Thank you so much.
Thank you both for leading in this wonderful conversation. And who's happy? Who's happy about this time? So it's a great, hopeful time. Charles,
Thank you.
you can be a saint. That I know.
Yes.
No doubt. You all can be saints. So thank you so much for being here tonight at the Catholic Information Center. Dr. Bunson will be outside signing books, which you can purchase just outside, as well as other things at your finest Catholic bookstore here on K Street, and and also help yourself to a glass of wine and beer. We believe book sales go up. Is that correct? So at the bar, and then there's some light refreshments. So thank you